And if I was to tell you that I was practically involved in the investigations of hundreds of murders, it would not be an exaggeration. If I said I was to tell you that I had sat with people called terrorist people and had faced them one-to-one, and if I told you there were hundreds of them, it would not be an exaggeration.
Ben Forde is a former detective with the Royal Ulster Constabulary. He's been blown up, shot at and driven from his home. But as a born-again Christian, he believes God has allowed these things to strengthen his beliefs and equip him to share his faith with others.
I'm only human, I'm just a man.
Ben is known affectionately as the singing detective. Music may be for pleasure, but it's also an outlet for pressure. Many of the lyrics on the 11 albums he has recorded reflect his personal experiences. Taking one day at a time became a way of life for long periods during the Troubles. And his songs became a meaningful therapy.
Help me to take one day at a time. One day at a time.
Ben Forde's roots are in the evangelical tradition. His own conversion experience was at the age of 17. Yet he's often had to tread a lonely path. Not all church congregations have been as welcoming as this one. He has discovered that writing about forgiveness in the Northern Ireland context can be a controversial issue. Some of his fellow believers feel that not enough emphasis is placed on the wrath of God, that there is too much sympathy for the criminal and not enough for the victim.
Today, show me the way, one day at a time.
And you know, the Christian faith is a singing faith. And I just retired from the RUC in the end of March of last year, and I'd just completed 32 years and a bit in that particular job.
Many of the stories Ben will relate tonight will have a shock factor, even to those who have been exposed on a daily basis to the media coverage of the Troubles. There are stories like the day he used his gun to shoot a fleeing robber, or when he was knocked unconscious in a bomb explosion. It was back in 1974. Ben was on duty in Botanic Avenue and had received notice of a car bomb in the area.
And there's a little green van with Belfast Gas written on the side of it. And I had my back against this vehicle when my colleague, he said, "Look, that window's open," meaning the window of the van. And he had, by this stage, had moved forward and put his head through the window. And he says, "Ben, there's a smell from that." So I opened the door, wisely or unwisely, and got in and knelt on the passenger seat and reached over into the back where there was a tarpaulin cover. And as I lifted that tarpaulin cover, I could see two large packages. I just shouted "bomb," and my colleague by that stage had understood the message and he was away, followed by myself. And as we turned the corner, he had gone right, and I saw these two elderly ladies come from the left over the bridge in Botanic Avenue. So I just naturally went to them and ushered them back. And by that stage there was vehicles coming up Posnet Street, so I wasn't able to get away from the immediate scene. So I went down in and I tried to stop a large concrete lorry which had come up alongside me as I entered Posnet Street. And it came between the van, the gas van, and myself. And there were vehicles coming. I was trying to get them to stop. And just at that point, the van bomb had exploded.
Ben was just 8 feet away from the van bomb. The concrete mixer lorry had driven between him and the van, shielding him from the explosion. Ben's wife, Lily, has been a strong support throughout his police career. When trouble strikes, the whole family can be affected.
One of the main things that's happened to us, of course, during our police service, and happens to many other policemen, was that we had to move out of our home Ben got a threat one Friday evening that he was to be killed the next day, and of course the police came out and said we'd be better moving home. Now that was difficult because it was 1 o'clock in the morning. We were actually moving out of our home and going to stay with friends, and we had to leave our children with other friends as well.
It's another story for the book, one of 4 which Ben has managed to hammer out on his antiquated typewriter. And they've sold well too. The first one, Hope in Bomb City, has been reprinted after selling more than 40,000 copies. As human interest stories, albeit from his Christian viewpoint, they've sold in secular as well as religious bookshops. As the title suggests, they're about forgiveness and hope. Yet there are conditions attached.
I can't forgive a person for a murder. I believe that there's only one person can forgive sins, and that's God himself. I also believe that if a person wants forgiveness, they must ask for forgiveness in the second place. And as far as me fulfilling my role as a policeman, I have to ferret out the criminal. I have to bring him to the courses of law and order, which I'm subject to be, as I would quote Romans 13 to you. And they would have to be subject to the judges and the powers of the state. As far as the long-term personal spiritual thing, there's only one can forgive them that. There's one mediator between God and man, and that's Christ Jesus.
Another police funeral. Since 1969, almost 300 police officers have lost their lives in the Troubles. Ben knew many of them as colleagues and friends.
I only have to turn the first page, and I start highlighting in colour in this little booklet the names of the men and my many friends whom I worked with, whom I shared a bedroom with, whom I played football with, etc., etc. And how it goes down.
But the worst blow of all came in January 1976, when Ben's best friend and Christian colleague, Neville Cummings, was killed. He had returned to Donegal Pass police station with a shotgun from an arms find. Unknown to him, it was booby-trapped. Neville and Inspector George Bell died as a result.
And I wept hard. And I believe that that sort of background taught me something of the joy of God. You say, where's the joy in that? There's something I believe as a Christian that I have deeper than grief. And it's something which I believe Neville has acquired. For greater is he that is in him than he that is in the world, to use a scriptural quote. And I believe that Neville went absent from this station of life to be with the presence of his God. I've had to say, why, Lord? Why? And you out there and talking to many widows, I've said the same thing. But I would write to members of the relations of IRA people, and have done so. I would seek to communicate and write on behalf of men serving life sentences in relation to parole. And those would be selected things and things which I've worked at. And I don't want the mother of an IRA fellow to suffer unnecessarily. I don't want her to grieve. And there are hurts in every quarter.
He doesn't like to see people hurting. That is one thing that really bothers him. He doesn't like to see people hurting. And I think that was probably one of the reasons that the books were brought out. He wanted to share with others. He wanted to share with others who were hurting and to identify with them. And of course, because of our Christian commitment and Ben's very deep Christian commitment, he had this faith in Christ and he had the love of God, and he wanted to share that with others.
This fella is an ex-INLA fellow. He's a chap that was on the hunger strike for 56 days. He lay on his own waste and urine for over 350 days. And yet when he read these little books, as a woman said, God anointed them, and Ben, you didn't write them. But he wrote this letter many years ago, and he says there has been an idea floating around in his head about a partnership of a policeman. And he puts Ben's name in brackets. An ex-UVF man called Charlie and an ex-INLA layman myself working for Jesus. Did we? Yes, we did.
Billy Mitchell is an ex-UVF commander who became acquainted with Ben Forde while serving a life sentence. Permission for Ben to visit him in prison was suddenly withdrawn by the authorities without explanation. But the two men continued to correspond throughout Billy's sentence.
I first met Ben Forde in early 1983 while I was in the H blocks at the Maze. I'd been a Christian for several years before this, and although I had never read of Ben's books, I'd heard about a Christian policeman who sang and who had published several books on his experiences and the troubles here. But basically because he was a policeman, I wasn't really interested in what was in his books. But one time in 1983, I used to pray every dinner time during lockup. And I remember starting this one Monday for my daily devotions, and every time I started to pray, a sort of impulse or a voice inside me was saying, "You ought to talk to Ben Forde."
As I visited him, he was to tell me that he was a Christian man. And we started to talk, and we found ourselves speaking about things about the rehabilitation of prisoners. And I told him a bit about my criminal caring. We seemed to have a kindred spirit. And we seemed to click. There was a bond from the very first time William and I met.
Ben came up. He obviously felt that I was somebody who wanted to confess something, and he had a colleague with him, George, I think his name was. And Ben says, "Well, what is it?" I says, "I don't know why I'm here." I explained what had happened the previous week, and he looked at me and says, "Well, I don't know why you sent for me." He said, "Is there anything else in your mind?" And I started to talk then about my ideas for crime prevention and rehabilitation. And he turned to his colleague. I remember him turning around to his colleague and saying, I knew there was something in it. And he says, "Before I left home this morning, I'd stuck the transcripts of a document I'm working on into my briefcase. I don't know why I'd done it." And he brought it out of his briefcase and threw it across the table to me, and he says, "Read that." And it was Ben's concept of what he called criminal caring.
And we built up a study of correspondence between each other, which is to do as to the reasons of becoming involved in the relation to the complex of feeling guilt after committing serious crime, as to where the role of police would have in our society in relation to their well-being on their release.
I interacted with Ben mainly by giving my views on his proposals, because his proposals were from a police point of view. He was trying to get an input from someone who was on the other side of the fence.
Billy had his goal. I helped him, I'd like to think, in some degree. He certainly helped me, because there was at a time I felt that he was my only ally in the pursuit of criminal caring.
Today, with support from his local evangelical church, Billy Mitchell is providing support for ex-prisoners. Ben's proposal for a criminal caring unit within the RUC was rejected. He's still searching for a way to fulfill his vision.
I would have loved to have seen something happen to link the police force with the ordinary people, i.e. the criminal fraternity.
But it's a source of immense disappointment to you that
Oh, yes.
it didn't get off the ground.
It's very disappointing whenever I've seen it work outside the establishment, and I've seen it work with the individual. But the system, or the establishment, I don't want to sound unkind, for I owe it a lot, did not see it. And they still haven't seen it. And I suppose maybe I'm a determined individual, but I sort of say, well, I can't help it if they're all wrong. They just haven't seen it.
Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus.
The notion of an official caring unit within the RUC is in the past. But at least these days Ben has more time to perform it in an unofficial capacity. And it's not just criminals who deserve to be cared for, there are victims too. Florence Cobb is a police widow who supported Ben's criminal caring efforts. Her home became a meeting place for reformed paramilitaries from both sides. Her husband Harold was shot dead by the IRA in 1977.
He was a police inspector, and he was in charge of about 20 men. And the barriers in Lurgan had to be opened every morning at 8:30. And that morning Harold had gone to the barrier at the top of the town, Queen Street, to make sure it was opened, and then he'd walk down to the other end, Market Square, I think, or Market Place, to make sure that it was opened in time. And it was while he was speaking to the police personnel on the barrier that the gunmen came out and shot 3 of them.
You must have had those times when you've had really deep grief.
Oh, of course, that's a natural reaction to death is grief, and you have got to go through it as part of the healing process. And just like any other widow, I went through that time of grief, a time of loneliness, and even a time, Ben, of asking why that God had allowed this to happen. Because Harold was a good man, he served the Lord faithfully, and there were times when I questioned why, but I believe that my faith has brought me through this all, and that God has given me the grace to forgive. Now, I'm not saying this will happen to every Christian widow, but as someone said to me, the healing process starts when you start forgiving.
The forgiveness side, it's hard. It's hard to forgive completely. You want to visit Avril Cummings after, 13, 14 years. You want to attend their children's weddings. You want to see them graduate from university. You want to listen to son giving his first wedding speech. And he says, my only regret is that my father's not here. If they could only see the harm that they've been doing, people who are about to kill.
Everything to God in prayer.
Today, Ben has brought his songs and stories to a senior citizens group. He has volunteered his time to provide an afternoon's entertainment. Singing hymns about a friend in Jesus seems a far cry from the hostile world of fighting crime and terrorism. How did he reconcile his preaching of a message of love with the actions of using a weapon which could have taken the life of a fellow human being?
As a policeman, I love Romans chapter 13. Now, I would advise you to take it down and look at it from a policeman's point of view. And it says something like this, that you're to be subject to the powers that be, for they're ordained of God. And it goes on about the members of that government, the powers, and i.e. it doesn't say the word policeman in the original version, but if you go into the modern translations, you'll find that the word policeman is actually, that's what it means. And in God's way, I believe that he has ordained every policeman as a peacekeeper. They may not all be Christians, but they're subject to his ordained will. And the people who would have to fear of a policeman would be the person who is living lawlessly or in breach of the criminal law, as it were. And that leads to disorder. So as far as I'm concerned, and I'm in the border area, and I see someone who's going to shoot either a colleague or some woman or some child or whatever, and I am carrying the equipment of part of that government which is subject to God, I've never had a conscience. I've never wanted to hurt nor maim anyone. But when it comes to the actual carrying the gun, it doesn't bother me. I've had to draw it perhaps on 3 occasions during my career. On one occasion I used it, and on another occasion I shot a man, and he lived.
The target for the raiders, a J&J food store at the Dub, opposite Fleming Fulton School at Upper Malone. 3 masked men burst into the store around lunchtime and confronted the supermarket manager, Dennis Burgess.
But they went in the exit door. It didn't seem right. Yeah, and they came running out the indoor. By that stage I was sort of half primed to approach them. And as they ran, I had to go at the second one as they rushed past. But there was just a brushing physical contact, and I was knocked against the steel shutter of a shop. And as they ran, they were headed around the corner, and I gave chase. And by that stage I had drawn my revolver. And what I seen after that was a car with at least 4 men in it. And the result of what actually the passenger appeared to be doing from the front, as if he had something in his hand, I just found myself firing the gun.
One of the bullets shattered a window in the car and a man inside was wounded in the shoulder. All 3 men abandoned the car and ran across playing fields to the nearby House of Sport. Astonished staff watched as the trio, with money bulging from their pockets, tried to use a telephone in the foyer. Seconds later, 2 policemen ran in and ordered the trio at gunpoint to lie on the floor.
And I remember searching one of them, and as I put my knee in the broad of his back, he yelped with pain. And I also found money, all the money which was actually stolen from the supermarket. And we got that back, and as he yelped with pain, he looked around and said, "Mister, you shot me." And I remember telling him to make himself as comfortable as he could. For he did appear genuine pain, and there was blood coming from his arm, shoulder direction. And well, the ambulance eventually came, all the police came and took him away.
But the two were to meet again. 2 years later, the man was brought to the police station cell for questioning about a different offence.
I remember sitting on the green mattress in the cell and asking him how he felt. Like, it's not every day you meet someone who you've shot, and he was very reasonable. And he said about, I asked him how he felt. He said, "You're only doing your job." He's very polite about the thing, but then when he asked, could I have bail on this one, I could understand something of his native cunning. But he went on to ask me, he said, "You're a Christian man?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I read your books in prison." And he had, because he related to things in the books. And he was asked, would there be any more? Well, that was the last time I'd seen him as such. And he was a chap that had been involved in crime. We couldn't give him bail because his computer printout was previous convictions of 28 physical feet long, because I remember putting the computer printout along the corridor of the station, and I measured it with my feet. It's not every day you would do that sort of thing, of course, but, well, it was 28 physical feet long. Whenever that shooting incident happened, I had probably about 28 years police service, of which I was in CID from the Springfield Road, Falls Road area from 1968. And I worked in Belfast all through the heavy sectarian, heavy murdering years of the early 70s. So much so that you experienced perhaps 10 bombs a day. I even found sectarian killings myself, the victims. In about 1975, I was asked to become a founder member of an anti-terrorist crime squad, in which we literally dealt with hundreds of murder investigations. You come on to the things which horrify and shock, like the murder of 2 soldiers in Andersonstown who were caught in a car. And you balance this with going into interview rooms and meeting the people who kill. You balance it with how many of my colleagues that have been murdered. You balance it with the news of every day. And then you have to be frank and honest with yourself when you're given a situation, when you're faced on the street with a position where you draw a gun. I think it has to be balanced in the light of what you've been grown up with. Had you been stationed in the Isle of Lewis and Stornoway, you never have a robbery. You never have a shooting. But we have shootings and murders every day, to this very day that you're doing this interview.
Ben Forde has a more leisurely lifestyle these days. He's glad to be away from the murder and mayhem which was part of his life for so long. But he believes that even the most unpleasant experiences had a purpose. And he's no regrets for following his conscience, doing what he felt was right, even if he wasn't always popular. Looking to the future, as long as he can continue to see hardened criminals mend their ways, then his hopes will be fulfilled.
Yes, come on.
My colleagues, I'm sure they're tired listening to me from time to time, but I didn't seek to embarrass anyone. And certainly the senior police officers that I worked with knew what I was when I was told that I was handpicked for the job. And I say that with a degree of pride, for I've always been a proud member of the RUC, and I still hold it in the highest esteem.